what I want to talk about today is some of the work I've been doing around basically understanding the Twitter population. And it really is as simple as that. It's just understanding who uses Twitter. There's been lots of anecdotal evidence about it. There have been some small surveys which are random, sort of identifying it. And there's been a lot of common sense around, yes, you know, there are probably more likely to be younger people on Twitter than older people, but nobody's really categorized it or looked at it in depth. And for me, I mean, I've been doing this work for about 3 or 4 years now. The fundamental question has always been who's represented and who isn't, both from a methodological point of view and also an ethical point of view of ignoring the people who aren't present. If certain people, certain populations are available on Twitter that aren't through survey methods, then perhaps Twitter was a way of accessing the disenfranchised, the people who would normally engage in social research. My line, and I'll say this right at the start rather than the end, is that no, this does not replace random sample surveys. I don't want to preempt the question at the end, but that's where I stand from the start. Social media is different. Someone would describe it as parallel epidemiology. It's a different way of doing things. It tells us something different. It augments our gold standard methods of doing social research. That's my stance to start with. Okay. So I've done various work about understanding how behaviour in the real world manifests in the virtual on Twitter. We tried to do this general election, and we didn't do very well, and there's some very good reasons for that. We've done some interesting work around crime settings, so looking at mentions of crime and disorder and correlating with actual occurrences in London. Investigating propagation on Twitter following horse-meat food scandal. This is a very interesting piece of work with the Food Standards Authority. And what you find when you look at the Twitter content very quickly around the horse-meat scare is that it's humour and jokes, and that might well be explained by the fact that most people on Twitter are young and following Frank Boyle, and that the people in charge of purchasing, who might have the honest concerns about food adulteration, are not generally represented on Twitter. They tend to be the only demographic of which a lower proportion represented compared to the population at large. There's also an ongoing project understanding Twitter use in the Welsh Assembly elections. All of these projects, particularly anything involving politics and voter intention, is enhanced tremendously by knowing who's using Twitter. So if we know someone's age, we probably know their propensity to vote. If we know their location, for instance, one of the reasons the election prediction didn't work is that we couldn't locate people exclusively in Scotland who were saying positive things about the SNP. So we couldn't control for the regional vote. We had to talk about national swing instead. So geography, gender, age, and occupational class is what I'm going to talk about, the staples of social science research. Because for me, fundamentally, social science is about understanding those group differences and understanding how these differences manifest in the real and the virtual. Okay? So I'm talking about Twitter, which is what I know about. Other platforms such as Facebook are completely different. So Facebook has demographics built in. We know someone's gender, we know their date of birth, and they choose to publicise it, and it's there and it's recorded. On Twitter, people don't have to put these things in. We gain them by proxy through looking for signatures of demographics. We gain them by looking at the description field of their profile, by their first name, where it's like to mean that they're male or female. So by looking for signatures, I'm going to be completely transparent about how we've done this. I'm going to talk about how we cross-referenced it and why we think we are hitting on genuine differences, genuine accurate categorizations. I'm perfectly happy to acknowledge that there's a lot missing, that we are making a lot of assumptions. These are first steps towards representation. Some of the information we've done with cross-referencing this recently with the British Social Attitude Survey 2015 suggests that we are getting something right, that the proportions we estimate in certain class groups, the distributions of age and distributions of gender are not too far off what the survey would suggest. Okay. So the first thing we'll talk about is location. I just want to quickly conceptualize location, because if you know where someone is when they tweet, if they send a tweet saying, I don't feel very safe walking through this area, and they have geotagging switched on, you have their lap on, you know the output area they're in, and all the geographies that ensues. You know the crime rates for that area, deprivation counts, immigration, everything. Okay, so for tweets that have geotagging switched on, which can account for probably up to 2% generally, globally, of tweets, we can provide a context for a contextless piece of data. Okay, so Twitter is often non-context specific. It misses a lot of the background data. When we know where someone is tweeting from exactly, we can start to fill in around them. And there's some of the interesting work that colleagues in the room have done actually from the ONS showing population migration based on Twitter. So when students coming out of the city to Twitter users, you can see flows. and so on and so forth, because you can track their movement. The scary thing is that if someone tweets 20 times a day through their life, you can track their movement through a city as well. So there's an area, we won't get into this today necessarily, but there's a whole growing literature on the ethics and what you can do and what you should do, what you're legally entitled to do according to the terms and conditions of the data, and what we should do as social researchers. You know, the two can often be quite far apart. Okay. So the highest level of location that's useful is geotagging. We can also look at the content of tweets and mundane geography, references to local landmarks. We can also look at user profile information, so anybody says they work in Manchester and their metadata. Of course, that's problematic because working in Manchester doesn't mean you live there, doesn't mean you were born there, doesn't mean you're there when you're tweeting either. It's the area you identify with. It's dependent on whether you have a professional account or a personal account as well. You know, personally, probably where you were born, professionally might be where you work, and so on and so forth. Okay. So just a quick graph there to show, loosely, the story is that the clusters of points correlate with what you would expect, a kind of Western world obsession with Twitter, less so in China and Asia where there are alternative networks. And if you zoom in the UK, you see clusters of geotagged points around urban centres, roughly matching population density, roughly speaking, as you would expect. Okay. Problem with geotagging, very quickly. If 2% of the Twitter feed have geotagging switched on, the social scientists, they're the people who would normally want to get hold of it because they can plug in the context. However, I have to talk about this afterwards because I'm whizzing through. Those who geotag and those who do not. Those who geotag are not a random sample of Twitter users. Twitter users are not a random sample of the UK population. They are not representative of each other. So men will like to geotag. Geotaggers tend to be older. Occupational group has an impact, which we'll go into more detail afterwards. Language makes a difference. So if you're using the Russian interface, you're less likely to geotag than using the UK interface, which may be to do with cultural norms. You don't do the Russian interface, you're probably Russian. It might be to do with something to do with data infrastructure. So you don't geotag as much when you're Russian because there are vast areas which don't have cell phone coverage or something like that. Okay, so you know, there are lots of hypotheses for why this might be the case, but they are not representative. Okay. Gender. We tried identifying gender with Twitter users by using their first name. So using some pattern matching algorithms and text keying algorithms to identify first names, compare it against a database of 40,000 names with no gender, being male, female, unisex, and also unknown. There are a lot of unknowns. Here, but those we could identify, we had a 48.8% male, 51.2% female split for tweets in the UK, broadly conceived, which is not far off the census estimates for the male-female population. Which in itself is interesting. That suggests to me that maybe we are identifying a genuine difference. If males and females identify disproportionately in identity play, with their gender online and construction of virtual identity, we wouldn't expect these to be so closely aligned. There is more evidence as well. So this is a sentiment chart, put aside with criticisms for sentiment, it shows the point I'm trying to make, for Super Saturday, which is the London Olympics when we won 3 gold medals. What you can see here, I apologise every time I'm doing this, the pink line represents female sentiment, the blue represents male. It's just because I always have to present this so fast, so just use it as a heuristic. But what you see here are 3 peaks in positive sentiment, which are associated with female users. They are so well defined from the male line that this makes me believe we are genuinely picking up a difference based on gender. And what you see is it correlated with Farah starting his race, making the move to 3rd, and then Jessica Ennis not winning her medal but securing her going place because she couldn't be called. Okay? So the conclusion from this is, first of all, real-world events manifest in the virtual. Secondly, that sentiment between men and women differs, and if we can see a difference this big and this significant, our categorization of gender is probably accurate, picking up a real difference. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is that when we looked at the BSA data for social attitudes, we asked people whether they use Twitter or not, and we found something different. So our proxy estimates say that 49% of the UK Twitter population is male. The BSA estimate says 57%. This means there is a differing practice in people being behaving on Twitter. So men are perhaps less likely to put their first name on Twitter. Okay? That's interesting from a behavioural perspective, but it shows that the proxy is underneath that, and that the actual gold standard survey shows something different. It'd be very interesting to chat to Jonathan earlier. We did something with the British election study, we're doing something with the Welsh election study as well, to see if all these surveys start to tell the same story. If they don't, then maybe we want to question the sampling of the survey methodology in the start, because they should be saying the same thing. Age. What we have here is the distribution of age by proportion of population according to the census and according to Twitter. And it shows pretty much what you'd expect. There is a massive peak of young people on Twitter. Now, the qualification for this is that the way we're identifying age is by people basically specifying 2 digits integer in their profile description field, followed by years old or I am XX. So we came up with some simple rules to classify it. Now, as you might expect, it would be reasonable to say that the older people are, the less likely they are to profess their age. People would guess an identity play. No one's under the age of 13 because you can't be on Twitter. Okay? So there's probably quite a few people here who are under the age of 13, but if they've chosen to say their age, they said they're 13 because or else they'd be violating the chucked off the platform. Now, this is only a small proportion of people over the age of 35, but a small proportion of a massive number, millions, is still a lot. So there are still tens, hundreds of thousands of people in the 30-plus age group on Twitter, which is still many more than we'd ever expect to get through a sample survey. Incidentally, this is anecdotal, but it's something I picked on recently, is you may have seen in the news that the number of people joining Twitter has started to flatline. And I don't personally think young people use Twitter. And that's my experience of when I teach my undergraduates. Most of them actually aren't using it. It's no longer a universal pedagogic tool. And what I suspect is that this peak will shift across. And what we have is a generation, a cohort of Twitter users who will continue to use it with a bit of atrophy as we go. And that will tail off then on the left-hand side of the curve. That's my feeling based on the data. I haven't got anything empirical to back it up, but when we repeat this in a few years' time, that's what I would anticipate finding. So not only is the demographic of Twitter represents the population, it is changing and different. It's saying it doesn't remain constant, it's not constantly youth platform, it's a generational effect, I suspect. Okay. The BS8 data, of course, shows something different, and it alludes to that idea that the older you are, the less likely you are to profess your age. But actually, the curve is much less steep, there is less of a peak under youth there are a lot more older users than we would anticipate looking at people who profess their age. And that, again, is a sign of differing behaviour on Twitter based on age. There's social desirability, and so on and so forth. Deception, intentional or not. Some will say they're 18 when they turn 19, so they think, oh, right, 19th birthday, I'm going to go on Twitter right now and update it. You know, it could just be information atrophy and neglect of profiles rather than intentional deceit. Demographic, can you comment on the slide? Sorry, just getting through faster than I expected. I thought I might miss it. Demographics, occupation. So what we have here is what we think the prevalence of simplified NSSEC is on Twitter, and then what it is in UK population according to the census. The way we do this is looking for occupational terms within the profile description field, matching them to the list of stock codes the ONS do, and then basically a little jiggery-pokery to simplify them into the analytical classes. Now, there's a lot wrong with doing that, even with you asking for other occupations in the survey. But nevertheless, what we find is quite interesting. And we have done, the paper has a lot more detail about human expert validation of this. So 3 of us sat down and looked at the algorithm and see how it's performing. It performs very well in higher managerial. So that correspondence between Twitter and census is identical in prevalence. And the reason it works well is it's people with professions. So, you know, lawyers, doctors, surgeons, those things are not confusable in terms. Whereas in group 2, what we have is writers, authors, painters, photographers, people who may well actually be professing a hobby rather than a career. So there's this distinction, and what this starts to pull out on Twitter is a wider problem, which I think we need to address as a research community, which is the difference between professional accounts, institutional accounts, and personal accounts. And the idea that are people talking about their work, are they talking about their hobby? What is the purpose of the virtual identity that they created on Twitter? What are they using for? Mine is shamelessly self-promotion. I'm completely open to that. I don't put anything personal on Twitter. I have other colleagues who have 2 accounts, who have a personal and a professional account. And then, of course, those accounts are being double counted in this. because we can't distinguish between individual users. We're not actually talking about individuals, we're talking about accounts. And in the back of our mind, we always need to bear in mind that. So yes, there may be millions of accounts that we can identify in the UK. There may even be 500,000 users, and they've all got multiples. So when you come, this is exactly the same graph again, and this time it's looking at the prevalence of BSA. So isolating those who said they use Twitter, and then look at the distribution across class. So if you like, this is my gold standard, that if my classification based on some quite informal rules, basically parsimonious rules, because of the amount of data it's having to deal with and the computational effort it takes, we actually find reasonably close correspondence in some groups, but not others, which is quite interesting. So, for example, routine occupations, notably underrepresented compared to the population and compared to what we identified. Now, if we go back, so I was chatting to someone about this yesterday, if we go back to the work I was doing on horse meat scare, this is really interesting. Who are the people that are most likely to be buying the meat that is adulterated with horse meat? Okay? It's not going to be the people shopping in Waitrose and Marks and Spencer's, it's going to be people shopping at Lidl and Aldi and the budget chains. Okay? So when we look on Twitter for talk and discussion about this, what we find is that the group most likely to be subject to this food scare are the people most underrepresented. And I have in my head this idea that Twitter is probably sort of urban elite phenomenon anyway. So we're probably suiting a lot of rural communities who obviously are very involved in food production anyway. So that's quite interesting. This bar as well is so I was worried that we'd overestimated group 2 because of the confusion between hobbies and occupations, and because of the large discrepancy between what I've got in the census. However, BSA data suggests not so much, and that could well be Twitter is the ideal medium for promoting yourself if you are a writer, if you are a photographer. It's a creative medium, might be a way you get work and professionalise yourself. So there could be an idea there that social class, social group, affects not just your use of Twitter, use it or not, but also the way in which you use it and what you use it for. Okay. So my summary is that the proxies aren't completely wrong. What we need to do now is to link the survey data to the proxy estimations to make sure they match. Now, we can do that for British social attitudes, because we've asked consent. Well, I've also just had an experiment accepted with colleagues at NatSen and ISA on the Understanding Society Innovation panel, both to ask whether people use Twitter and to ask for their consent to link between the longitudinal data and their own. I think that's the next 10 years of my life set up if that goes ahead, because I'll be picking that apart for ages. But that fundamentally is the interesting, to correspond the operationalisation of concepts, of intentions, of attitudes on the survey, and see how they manifest in the real world, and also to check that the representation classification we're doing is correct or not. Thank you.
What caused the pretty massive error in polls in 2015? So I'm going to go through very quickly because there's quite a lot here. What the problem was, what the potential causes are, what data we're using to look at it, go through the different explanations. The answer is it's representative samples, so I'm going to skip through these fast, and then talk about possible solutions. So just to outline the problem again, the final election result was a comfortable win by the Conservatives over Labour, and they actually got a majority. The polls were not telling us this in advance. They said it was going to be neck and neck, and really anyone could win, and was probably not going to be a majority at all. And this was very consistent across the polls as well. It wasn't a wide variation, it was everyone said it was neck and neck. So the question is why? So we identified 5 possible causes of this. First of all, late swing, which essentially says that people change their mind after they answer the polls. Differential don't knows, which would simply be that people who said they hadn't made up their mind in the campaign went and systematically moved in one direction. Vote intention misreporting, which is a nice way of saying they lied to us. Differential turnout, which is that some people overestimated how likely they were to actually go and vote, and so that some Labour supporters, for instance, might have really wanted to get to the polls but then didn't quite make it there. And finally, the representativeness of the samples. So we have 2 sources of data to go and look at. First of all, the British Election Study Internet Panel, and this is an online panel conducted by YouGov, which is one of the most prolific pollsters in the UK. And because they're a prolific pollster, this makes it a good source of an analogue of polling data. So we can use this as a way of looking at what problems in polls were likely to be, not least because it had the same issues as those polls. And then, of course, we also need a more gold standard to compare it to. So we also have the British election study face-to-face probability sample that was conducted by GfK and MP. At least by one British standards, got a pretty good response rate of 56%. And importantly, it gets much closer to the actual result. So, to look at evidence for late swing, across the course of the campaign, the Conservatives did seem to be somewhat improving. But of course, what matters for late swing is not that they improved in the campaign, but how they switched from when they were asked to later. So we can look at that because we went and followed up with all these people again after the elections, and these are the same groups of people. And what we find is that there wasn't a swing from Labour to Conservatives. Actually, it moved very slightly in the other direction. These look like very dramatic swings, but of course the scale here is very compressed. So mainly there was very little change at all in the state of the parties and where people were in the campaign and afterwards. And if there was any swing at all, it would have actually been counteracting the miss in the polls rather than exacerbating it. So what about differential don't knows? So in this case, there is actually a Conservative lead among the don't knows that was larger than in the rest of the sample, but it's actually pretty trivial in terms of its impact. The Conservatives had about a 2-point lead among the don't knows, whereas a smaller lead among the rest of the sample. But when you multiply it all out, it accounts for pretty much none of the difference. So while we think this is an issue, it's not a very large one. So vote intention misreporting. This, of course, is quite hard to go and actually work out, because if people are lying to us, then it's hard to go and prove them wrong, because, of course, the ballot is secret. So I'm going to present various circumstantial evidence for why I don't think it was the case. So one theory that went round within pollsters for quite a while afterwards was that to get people to go and admit they were going to vote Tory, you just had to warm them up with some issue questions or leadership questions, and then they'd realise that in their true hearts they really wanted to vote Conservative. So fortunately, we'd randomised the placement of vote intention on the first 3 waves of the British election study panel. And we either placed it right at the start before anything else, or we placed it right at the end after 30 minutes being asked everything you can think of about politics. And in a 30,000 person sample, there is no statistical difference between them. You'll notice these are all in the same direction, but the randomisation only occurred once. These are not independent differences. The second piece of circumstantial evidence is, if people are lying to us, you'd probably expect it to be a social desirability effect. And we have to think about where you would have social pressure on you. Probably if you're not telling the truth about voting Conservative, it's because you're surrounded by people who think voting Conservative is a bad thing. So we'd expect the missing Conservatives to be in places where there are many Labour supporters and few Conservatives. Instead, we actually see the opposite effect. So this is Conservative share in 2010. This full line here is the actual result by constituency for Conservatives, and this is the result in the surveys. So we're actually missing Conservatives, not in the sort of Labour-leaning areas, but in the shires. And you see the same thing with the Labour one. So if it is them lying to us, they're lying to us for very odd reasons and not for social desirability. And then one final piece of evidence for this, again, still circumstantial, is in the face-to-face, we allow people to go and say they refused to go and tell us who they voted for, but we still went and asked them, how likely is it that you would ever vote for each of these parties? So we have still a lot of information about what they think of the parties. When we go and model this, essentially, we find that the people who refuse are less conservative than you would expect in the rest of the sample. So all our evidence suggests that the people who aren't willing to talk to us are not disproportionately conservative, or who will lie to us are not disproportionately conservative. So we don't think this is the effect here. So then there's differential turnout, and this again is just the idea that certain party supporters would be less likely to turn up on the day compared to what they'd said beforehand. So to test this, and we thought this was likely to be the explanation for a long time, but what we did was we matched our respondents on the survey to their registration records and the marked register, which actually says whether they turned out to vote, so we can see what their actual turnout was. And what we find is essentially the turnout rate among people who said they were going to vote Conservative or said they were going to vote Labour is essentially indistinguishable. It's more or less the same in this sample. There's really no evidence that Labour supporters said they were definitely going to turn out and then didn't bother on the day. There's no difference there. Doesn't seem to be the explanation. So, getting to representative samples and the reason for this panel. So comparing the face-to-face, which is the probability sample, to the panel, which is, again, closer to polling data, we find that the face-to-face, the Conservatives have quite a healthy lead over Labour. In fact, it's actually a little too large, whereas in the panel, they are about neck and neck. Also, if you go and add up all the errors across the different parties, the face-to-face also goes and performs considerably better than the panel. It appears that, given that we've excluded the other reasons, representativeness does seem to correlate with getting a closer, more accurate result. What is it about the representativeness that matters here? So we can look at some demographics as compared across the two samples. And to begin with, there isn't actually that much to look at here. Okay, so we are underrepresenting the panel, some of the oldest age group, and this is due to the fact that they have, in the weighting scheme in Yugo, 60 plus is the oldest age cutoff, so you end up with the slightly younger, older people overrepresented. But there's not too much difference there, and the same with working status. And in fact, with party identification, and bear in mind this is comparing two samples that one of them had a very large Conservative lead, one had a very small one. They actually have extremely similar party ID distributions. So this is across the total sample. But then we thought, well, what about just the voters in the sample? Because they're the ones that actually matter for getting the vote intention right. And when you do that, the errors go up across all of these quite considerably. What we see there is now we've gone and increased the disproportionate underrepresentation of the older voters quite a lot, and the panel is now greatly overrepresenting young voters compared to the face-to-face. Similarly, with party ID, it was pretty much spot on before. There's now, in the face-to-face, a very large Conservative over Labour lead, and the panel basically hasn't changed at all. So we think the problem here is that in the panel, the sample they have looks like the general population, and the voter sample they have also looks like the general population. They're not differentiating the voter subset of it from the general sample amount. So what's going on? Well, we think that this reflects the fact that polls go and weight to general population targets. So they'll say, we need this many young people based on the census, and this many people from this region, and all these other variables. And then they remove the non-voters, and they assume that what's left is representative of the people who actually vote. But the issue here is that the general population doesn't look that much at all like the electorate at all, because in fact 40% of the general population don't vote in any given election. And non-voters also get underrepresented on surveys. So on your average polling sample, you'll have a turnout rate stated by the respondents of around 90%, which is much too high. And hence, what you get is when you go and weight this over-engaged sample that has too many voters in it to look like the general population, you end up overweighting people from groups that don't turn out that much. So to sort of give an example of this is all made up data in the next part, but just to sort of walk through the process to look at this. So we're imagining a world where we have 200 old people, 200 young people. In this case, there's about 50% turnout among the young. The olds have a much higher turnout. Old people support Conservatives more, young people support Labour more. However, if you go and look across this, among voters, there's about an 8 percentage point lead in the population. So we're going to do a sample. We're going to sample 50 old people, 50 young people, so that we get the proportions right for the general population. But the catch on this, and this is not too far from reality, is that if you are going to vote, you have a 90% chance of responding to our poll. If you aren't going to vote, then you only have a 10% chance of responding. And while those proportions are both much too high, the ratio is not far off the reality that you get in polling. So with young people, to go and get the sample we needed, we ended up having to make 93 calls. It's all done with a simulation. But what we see here is that for the ones who answer the phone, for the voters, we get plenty of them in our sample, yeah? But for the non-voters, most of them just hang up. So the sample of young people we get is great in terms of the average balance of Labour and Conservative, but not very good in terms of representing its disengagement. We do the same thing for the old people, and you end up with, again, a good representation there. All the non-voters hang up on us. And what we have at the end here is we have a sample that at the population level is perfectly representative in terms of age. We have the right proportion of old and young people. And it's perfectly representative within each of these in terms of Labour and Conservatives. Yet we've gone from an 8-point lead in the population of Conservatives over Labour to a 1-point lead in this sample we've done of Labour and the Conservatives, merely on the basis of this differential response that's correlated with the actual outcome. So, given that this seems to be the problem, we thought perhaps we can go and do some correction of this by introducing an extra weighting factor for the expected proportion of non-voters. We upweight non-voters to be their correct proportion in the sample. And what we get when we do that is it does actually quite substantially increase the Conservative over Labour lead and reduces the sum of absolute errors actually below the rate of the probability sample. We can also go and look at other ways in which the sample is disengaged. Party members also tend to be overrepresented. And when we do that, we increase the lead further, the errors again decline. So this does seem to be leading to some improvement. Now, if this is correct, you should not be able to only improve a sample, you should also be able to ruin a good sample. So with the face-to-face, at the moment it's weighted as it is, but the analogy here would be to take only the voters in the face-to-face and weight that to look like the population and see what happens. And when we do that, this is weighting just the voters from the face-to-face using the same factors. The Conservative over Labour lead declines really quite hugely and the error increases. So in both cases, this mechanism seems to be able to go and change the quality of this sample quite a bit. So, how long ago? Fine, great. Okay, so there was one other representativeness issue we found here, which is these are the weighting categories here. So this is the 18 to 24, and then 25 to 39, etc. And within each of these categories, what we find is that half of the category gets overrepresented at each age year compared to the census, the other half gets underrepresented. And this is particularly a problem in the oldest age group, where there's an overrepresentation of the 60 to about 70, and then from 70 plus, very underrepresented. And this is a problem because the Conservative over Labour lead, of course, increases across this whole period. So we were wondering about whether this could also be a cause of it. And the short answer to give it away is that it's not, because this error here cancels out these ones here. However, we think that's probably a ticking time bomb in polling, which at some point is going to cause a major issue. So we developed a technique, and I'm not going to go over it in too much detail here, but happy to talk about it afterwards, of how to go and weight to a continuous distribution of age rather than going and only weighting to a set of categories. And essentially what we do is we go and look at these two continuous distributions, and rather than ranking along each category, we go and rake the ratio of the two density distributions at each point and use that to adjust the weight. So this is using the discrete ranking method. That's the way pollsters would normally do it, and you get this bumpy age distribution that doesn't look very much like its target here. And this is using our approach, so this is the distribution we get after the weighting, and all the other factors also are still representative at this point. So again, that's not the cause of the polling error, but we do think that this may be essentially getting ahead of the curve here in terms of future problems. So just briefly, why did this happen in 2015 rather than earlier? Well, if we look at the ratio of when we did those turnout adjusted weights, the ratio of the normal weights over the turnout adjusted weights, look where these are being adjusted. So the people who are being most adjusted in 2010, it's fairly flat for Labour. It's not adjusting them very much. They're as likely to be adjusted a lot or adjusted a little. Interestingly, the people who did get adjusted a lot were actually the Liberal Democrats, and if anyone remembers back to then, there was actually quite a major polling miss in 2010 for the Lib Dems where they were overrepresented. So this also seems to potentially be an explanation for a previous polling miss as well. In 2015, by contrast, there's a much bigger change here. Conservatives are very negatively correlated with the size of the adjustment. Lib Dems are flat this time. And it seems that some of these people here moved to Labour and increased the gap between Labour and Conservatives in terms of this type of unrepresentativeness. And that's why it happened in 2015 rather than in other years. So potential solutions. So I already mentioned one, we go and weight up non-voters. The slight problem with this, of course, is that you don't have a measure of whether someone is definitely going to vote beforehand. What you have is some kind of model probabilities. So we've also developed a technique here to go and weight to the expected, you essentially calibrate the expected average probability of turnout across the sample. And this can also go and adjust the sample in a similar way. It's relatively effective. It seems to work quite well in past samples. We don't 100% know whether this will cause other problems we haven't come across yet, because you're still making a lot of assumptions about the conditional distributions of your variables based on whether people have turned out or not. So there is still unrepresentativeness within the voters and non-voters. You could still have problems here. We think it may be part of the solution. The other possible solution is, rather than waiting to the general population target, you simply wait to target about the voters themselves. So we say we want our sample to end up looking like the voting population. But the difficulty here is where to get those targets. You could go and use samples such as the one we used here, or exit polls, but at the moment we don't have exit polls with demographics, and basing your entire weighting scheme on a 3,000 person sample is brave, to say the least. So there's downsides to both of those options, but I think it's at least good to know what the problems are. Thank you.
I'm the head of methods at, well, a company that's changed its name today from TNS BMRB to Kantar Public. I imagine neither name means very much, but ultimately we're one of the largest agencies that does social research in the UK. We do fieldwork for Understanding Society, for instance, and the crime surveying as well, amongst others. But for this project, we were working with colleagues at UCL, Lisa Calderwood at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies. Essentially, the ESRC wanted us to, part strategic, part technical project to actually look at the potential for having a probability sample-based web panel in the UK, for the use of academics and others in the social research world. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And then in a few slides, I sort of veer off and talk more generally about probability samples versus non-probability samples. And also, we do polling as well, so we're one of those guys. In fact, your particular method at the end, we adopted about 9 months ago. And it's been quite successful in our two polls, two elections successful. So why would the ESRC fund a UK web panel from their perspective? Well, it's always wanted to have a kind of multidisciplinary vehicle for high quality but quite modest scale quantitative research. It no longer really funds directly, it tends to farm that out, so large groups will then disperse the funds beyond there. But it would like to control some quality of that work that's done. But it's always been interested in that. But it was also interested in this because it's a potentially, I say potentially, but not definitely, potentially also a lower cost vehicle for some of the long-running general population studies that it does fund and intends to continue funding. Principally the British Social Attitude Survey and the British Election Study, both of which that featured in John's papers. I think actually those ones are not very likely to shift to this scenario. The British Social Attitude Study has been going on for decades and it's always used interview data collection and switching it, especially any sort of attitudinal research when you switch from interviews to self-completion, usually creates a disjuncture that people won't like. The British Election Study, although it has a large internet panel component, has always had that face-to-face survey as a kind of validation, if you like, what else, and it's obviously proved extremely useful in 2015. But even those that aside, I mean, their interest would be that a high-spec web panel would fit the bill, so long as it could also accommodate the population that is offline in the UK. Now that population is still nearly 20%, and it declines at a very, very slow rate at the moment. Essentially, as an older population that don't use the internet drop out of the population very nicely. So at the moment, that would still be an important factor for them, and of course it's one of the reasons why all the commercial web panels that there are in the UK are not appropriate for this particular requirement. There are also several European examples of this kind of panel. The first one, first and greatest, was the one in the Netherlands called the LIS panel. There are also 2 in Germany, 1 in France, I think 1 has just started in Norway as well. And these panels have started to link together, so they have a sort of core questionnaire set that combine all of those countries together. And the ESRC has always had an interest in linking in with that. There are also, the United States has several examples of these sorts of random sample panels. They do tend to be a bit lower spec than the European ones. So the most long-lived one was one called the Knowledge Panel, which is now run by GfK, which is enormous. But when I say lower spec, they effectively sample via perhaps off the back of a random digit dialing survey, or they do some address-based mail surveys and bring them in that way. And that's also true of the other US examples, which is the American Life Panel and the American Trends Panel that Pew Research put together. So they tend to be a little bit lower spec than those European examples. But the Knowledge Panel is in fact a commercial panel. It's the only one. All of the others have essentially either been funded by some sort of central government or European source, or in the case of Pew Research, a very long-standing bequest. Now that brings us why the UK has a pretty strong social research agency community, if you like. But the commercial risks of starting something like this are enormous. And also the three agencies that could really do this, GfK, Ipsos, and now called Kantar, who are global companies, tend to put most of their investment in the markets where there's a lot of growth. The UK is a relatively saturated, mature market, and it's not likely to get that sort of investment. Hence, the ESRC is not expecting a market solution here. Now, for UK social scientists, certainly the ones we talk to, and we talk to many, this is an extremely exciting idea. It's always been a dream to get timely, high-quality data, pretty low cost, and also with panels, of course, the ability to target smaller subpopulations, do studies on those without all the additional costs of screening a larger population for them, and also the potential for repeat measures, which is often not possible except on those huge things like Understanding Society, where you'll be waiting for 5 years for your data. And the reality they're faced with is that the things which are low cost and timely and target small populations are these commercial web panels. And they are not necessarily representative of the population, not simply because they omit the offline group entirely, but they're not particularly representative of the online group either. There's also the way these things are run, very much a commercial proposition, and then quite low margin operations as well, means that your doubts about data quality and about the veracity is who exactly is completing these surveys, and is it a person, is a reasonable question to ask in some cases. Those sorts of things aren't necessarily going to go away unless there's a commercial imperative for those panelists to change the way they build and maintain their panels. And finally, these panels tend to be not exactly exciting experiences for panelists, and they tend to there tends to be a lot of churn on those panels. So people can join, do a few surveys, they leave. There's always an underlying group that's been there for years and years and years, but on top of it you get that sort of churn. But I mean, there are examples, the BES Internet study that YouGov ran is a very good counterexample, where the repeat measures was possible with sort of, I believe about 80% of wave on wave, which is pretty good, and as good as you will get on most face-to-face surveys. So it's not impossible, but the commercial imperative is kind of against it. So what did we, which is Centre for Longitudinal Studies, Kantar, do the ESRC? Now the ESRC had actually commissioned a couple of studies before we even got there, but they never seemed to quite get down to brass tacks. So the interest here was not only to look at the strategic issues, but to estimate the demand and actually draft a design for such a panel. We did quite a number of different activities to do this. Obviously quite in-depth interviews with ESRC funding decision makers, also the principal investigators of key studies that might potentially move on to this vehicle, and also potential partners in government. Most big random sample surveys are actually commissioned by government and not academia. We also added to this a kind of deliberative research event where essentially bringing in users or potential funders of such a vehicle and actually asking them to prioritise into different aspects of a technical design or different ways of paying for things. And in a deliberative sense, what you give a lot of information beforehand and then a lot of information during the event and see how that changes people's attitudes. There's also some semi-structured questionnaires and asking more or less the same questions for those who are not attending the event. Consultation with those that have built these sorts of panels before, and two of our team, of our wider team, were in fact part of built panels themselves. That included the head of the list panel, the head of the American Life panel. And finally, Kantar created a kind of costing and pricing spreadsheet tool for the ESRC, so they could change the shape of their panel and different ways of charging for it, and have a look at the gross and net costs under all these different scenarios. So it's quite a multi-pronged process. So what did people want from this? Well, the first thing, I think, generally speaking, everyone wanted it to be big. And there was a lot of disgruntlement with the idea of a much smaller panel. So by big, nobody really wanted anything smaller than about 10,000, that you were able to do a study with 10,000 separate individuals as a minimum. And also, the devolved administrations within the UK would not fund it unless they had at least 1,000. So that's people that they could ensure they'd get 1,000 for one study, 10,000 for a individual study. It doesn't mean all studies would require 10,000. You'd have some sort of modular structure, just as most panel research, commercial panel research is done. Secondly, that probability sampling was essential, although really the SRC wasn't interested in an alternative to that. So it was almost a given, but it was essentially supported by those who use it. Thirdly, that high recruitment rates into the panel were important to most, but not at all. Some, because it's a very expensive part of building the panel, some were quite content to have a lower response rate initially, so long as all the effort and resources were putting into maintaining that panel, so the repeat measures could be taken. And that was always a hugely attractive option for people. And possibly because this is what people were familiar with, it was the omnibus design, which is quite common from market research agencies, that was most popular. So the idea that you might do it monthly or every other month, 30-minute-ish omnibus survey, possibly in bite-sized chunks, possibly not, but with sort of different charging options as well. So not just the flat rates that you get in commercial market research, but perhaps something based on ability to pay, something based on how open you're going to be with the data release and things like that. But a fairly traditional looking survey. Also very keen on the idea that there would be a kind of core demographic behavioural attitudinal questionnaire. So anybody who came to the panel would complete about 30, 40 minutes of that before they started engaging with any of the actual commissioned studies. And that some of this data would be updated maybe 5 minutes or so each time the survey was run. And that all this data everyone will get, so anyone using the panel will get it. And anyone who's used omnibus surveys, you get a little bit of that data. You get like gender and age and a few other things. But it's actually not that useful. So the idea of getting a great big 40 minutes that's update to the month was very attractive. More sort of contentious points really. One was about the idea that you might recruit everybody in a particular household that you'd sample, be able to get some sort of intra-household data. But although that's attractive to some, it was not really for the majority, because first of all, you'll always have some holes in your household, so you won't actually get full household data particularly often. And also at the time, the churn would mean that that would decrease. And nobody really liked the idea of following up. So if somebody left the household, we got a new household, we got all those people in, which is very much the understanding society design is a complexity that people weren't very keen on. And beyond that, in terms of measurement, there is always that risk of conditioning. So if somebody does a survey first, they tell everybody else in the household what it's like. Some of them decide not to do it on that basis, or they change the way they answer it, and so on and so forth. That probably doesn't happen that often, but it's a fear in people's minds. So it was popular for some, not for others. An ethnic minority boost was popular right across the board, especially if the actual panel ultimately was less than 10,000 cases, because so much research likes to actually identify that group. And of course, as a group, that's hardly monolithic, so you'd actually like to be able to look at different ethnic groups within that. And those are particularly attractive to government researchers, not quite a condition of their co-funding potentially of such a big corpus, but getting close to that. In terms of coverage of the offline group, it was actually more varied than I thought. Some were content to, for instance, stick a maximum age range for all the inferences that would be drawn from such a panel, in which case the coverage drops, non-coverage drops from 20% to about 3 or 4%. Some people were content with that, most not. But as part of our deliberative event, we were trying to show people the cost of this, because they're a very expensive group to cover. You either actually assist them to become online, in which case you give them, you pay for a data subscription, give them a device and so on, which is the mechanism used in most of the European panels, or you use an alternative mode like telephone or paper. And neither of those modes are actually perfect fits for online data. So, and also increase the time spent at the back end as you combine two different data sources, try and accommodate some of the, or account for some of the measurement differences between them. So once people started to think about the cost and what they were losing, some people started to actually get more liking the idea of, say, putting 70 as a maximum group. For others, that was an absolute, red line. Children's involvement. No one really wanted it designed in, even though there's a lot of people who do lots of research with children. But the idea of quantitative research with children seemed to have less general interest than we were expecting. But the opportunity that you might do some ad hoc research with the children panel members was attractive. And finally, one of our team was pretty disappointed with this, but non-questionnaire data, which is incredibly exciting. We talked about it before, where you can, let's say, attach Twitter handles to the panel and then start tracking people on Twitter and so on. But not just that, there's apps for almost everything. You can track people's online journeys for months on end, should we choose to do so, and should they agree to do that. But few of the users we spoke to could quite envisage their projects requiring that, but all of them could envisage how those sorts of projects might spoil the panel for everyone else. But essentially, most people were still keen on the idea of asking a question, getting an answer back, and analysing the data in a way that they could live with. So this is very exciting and pioneering. People didn't really want it to mess up the main panel. We'd rather like understanding society, where all the innovation has to be done on a separate group, because nobody really wants to touch the main 30,000. So I just want to sort of go back to that point about probability sampling. The requirement for probability sampling for any of these panels hugely adds to the cost of them, which is why there aren't very many of them, and they've mostly been funded in a non-commercial way. Because you think, well, okay, aside from the offline representation issue, what's the problem here? And obviously, this sort of approach of random sampling does allow estimation of margins of error, which has some theoretical validity. Confidence intervals here, and it provides some security with respect to representation. So if you're doing a random sampling and everything's working fine, the sample should be representative not just on observed and observable variables, but on unobserved and unobservable variables as well. And that's in theory, therefore, that the random samples are not so dependent on models that connect the sample to the population for their validity. And of course, some scientists and research commissioners, especially those of a slightly older generation, will only trust probability sampling data. And that's a red line for them. Of course, in practice, real probability samples do not always match up to the ideal. Some of them do. So we do the crime survey, and we get a response rate of 74%. Right? But some of these other probability samples, if we go back to that Pew panel, well, it was recruited off the back of random digit dialing surveys, which have response rates of 9 or 10%, and then some of those didn't want to take part, and blah, blah, blah. You're down to about 3 or 4% at the end of the day. Now, does it still have validity there? There's plenty of studies showing that the accuracy of probability sample estimates is not very strongly correlated with response rate, but there probably is a point when it gets very, very low, where it becomes difficult to distinguish from some of the non-probability samples in terms of sort of average accuracy. So there's been quite a number of comparison studies here looking at web panels being recruited in these different ways, probability sampling, non-probability. The latest one was actually released a couple of months ago. Pew Research did a piece. I'll just flip forward to one of their charts. Now, these are sort of average error scores on against various government benchmarks. And you'll see that ATP is their random sample panel. In some respects, it does pretty well, and in others, it's pretty moderate with fairly large error scores. But you might also notice sample I winning 3 of the 4 categories and coming third in the other, which was a non-probability sample. Of course, everybody wanted to know what sample I was. The sample I was clearly doing better than, say, D or G, the ones at the bottom. So when you're buying non-probability samples, there's a difference between one and another. Now, sample I turns out to be YouGov USA, and they use a considerably more sophisticated sampling mechanism than any of the others do. So that's something to bear in mind. Second point, Brexit referendum polls, 2016. In fact, there were 3 random samples done right at the end on this. Only one was published, 2 others were funded by hedge funds that wanted to play the currency markets right at the last minute. Now, they, between them, got a lead for Remain between 6 percentage points and 14 percentage points. So they certainly didn't do any better than the non-probability polls, and 2 or 3 of the non-probability polls, had a lead for Leave, and they were the most accurate compared to these random sample polls. So I think it's obviously always partial evidence. Well-constructed non-probability samples are not necessarily less representative than probability samples. It does very much depend on what they're doing. But I think the advantage of probability samples probably is more in instilling confidence in the buyer in lowering the risk of very wrong inferences, albeit these Brexit ones, clearly the inference was wrong. And almost everybody in the industry had heard about these secret random sample polls and was convinced that their leads for Leave were therefore wrong. And you might ask yourself why suddenly we've got a bit of a shift towards Remain in the last 2 weeks for that reason. Anyway. Final thing about web panels is a data quality issue, especially, it's kind of correlated with worries about the sample in non-probability samples. Online panels, it's essentially a kind of ongoing war between those running the online panels and those trying to game it. So you'll have people who are professional responders who manage lots of different panels, and they just do it in order to get some income. There are people who just speed through, and they're usually the same sort of people. It's the quickest way through a survey, and that's all they care about. Often it's if you present a lot of don't know options or midpoint options on a scale, they're the ones picking those. There's also what we call filter fixers, so people who realise to get into the survey, they need to be able to pretend they're a certain sort of person. So they tick all those things, and they get through. Again, they're doing it for income. There's also this thing called survey bots. They're not even people, robots filling them in. Again, income, and so on and so forth. There's often a fight, so there will always be technology trying to stop all of this, and then new technology comes up and so on. So you've always got that. With random samples, you avoid much of this because those samples usually have pretty minimal previous experience of being part of a panel or actually completing questionnaires full stop. And they actually have pretty few tactics. So there's some data quality advantage that comes through that. Because repeat experience, once you put them on a panel, might make them be a bit more like commercial panelists. But I think they are protected somewhat on these random sample panels. So relatively low frequency in which data is requested, pretty high incentives compared to the online. But you barely make any money at all being an online panelist. There are much higher incentives on the random sample panel. And personalised contact methods as well, so you can bring that kind of social contract part into it. And that's intended to preserve quality. So none of those things can really be afforded by a commercial panel. So I'll just finish by saying a few prospects for the future. Well, there's no funding decision from ESRC as far as I know, and we don't actually know when they will make a decision, or whether in fact they will tell us. So I can't really tell you very much about that. It's also been, since we did this, a bit of a change in the UK marketplace, and Nat Sen that runs the British Social Attitude Survey decided to form their own web panel off the back of that. And in fact, it was that where they launched it, and they said, our Brexit result is a 6-point lead for Remain. So it was a bit unfortunate for them, but actually it's very well run. They're releasing the microdata for it, all the technical reporting is all there. But it's small, so it's less than 2,000 cases in there. They're only doing it once a quarter, so it doesn't really fulfill the demands that there is for this kind of thing. There's also some potential for non-panel web surveying. Kantar, we've developed a method called ABOS, address-based online surveying, which is random samples web surveying, but it's not panel-based. It could be built into an omnibus format, but it's not yet. And of course, you don't get repeat measures. So there's a few drawbacks there. But it is lower cost than everything we've discussed. And finally, of course, there is potential for better or more varied sampling for non-probability panels. And these kind of electoral misses or referendum misses can be quite strong imperatives to change things. So it's not just YouGov in the United States doing some quite interesting stuff, but there's several other panels as well. So there is potential there, and that's something that might replace the demand for a random sample panel, although I would personally doubt it. Okay, I'll finish that.